Good evening, friends. Once again, welcome to this MSME course, day 2, as designed by Sachin Sinha ji, Pankaj Chawla ji, Parul ji, all our eminent group member. And today we are going to discuss taxation on transactions of share capital, ESOP, and other tax regulatory issue. So we have with us our eminent faculty and my friend CA Parul Agrawal ji. Parul ji, once again, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
And our yesterday expert CA Pankaj Chawla ji with us. So sir, स्वागत है आपका भी.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so
Our
much.
team member CA Sachin Sinha ji with us. Sir, स्वागत है आपका भी. And all other
Thank you, sir.
participants,
Thank you.
all other participant who made this different topic successful, rather in term of very much discussion, where we have yesterday discussed so many issues with regard to MSME registration, compliances. And today, before I request other one, I would like to brief about Parul ma'am. CA Parul Agrawal ji is a practicing chartered accountant running a sole proprietorship firm, PMA Tax Chamber. She formed in the year of 2015, and she has a rich experience over the 13 years, specializing in tax regulatory advisory and with the big four. I'm not taking the names, and compliance related services for Indian corporate with other professional firms. So she has a vast knowledge in the field of advisory services. She has a CA firm, Parul Mittal and Associate. Clients are provided services with the complete hand-holding approach. Major area of services includes international taxation, transfer pricing, advisory, due diligence, certifications. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, Parul ma'am has delivered various lectures with the study circles, chapters, ICI platform. So she has a rich experience about the subject. Before I would go for the technical session, I request Sachin Sinha ji to say about the today's topic. Over to you, Sachin bhai.
Thank you, Sumit bhai. Good evening, all friends and all speakers. Yesterday's speaker Pankaj Chawla ji and today's speaker Parul ma'am.
Good evening.
Friends, कल अगर आप लोगों ने वीरेंद्र सहवाग की बैटिंग देखी है, आज आप लोग राहुल द्रविड़ को फेस करने वाले हैं. कल का जो सेशन था उसका जो फीडबैक हम लोगों ने एट द एंड ऑफ द सेशन लिया और जो यूट्यूब में रिस्पॉन्स आए, दैट इज एक्सेलेंट. और चूंकि टॉपिक नया है, काफी लोगों ने इसको अप्रिशिएट किया है. तो कल का टॉपिक जिस तरह से पंकज जी ने डिलीवर किया था, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इट वाज ऑसम एंड रियली well appreciated by all the participants and all the viewers who was on the YouTube. So today's session, about today's session, it is also very important because अगर हम लोग किसी टॉपिक like MSME to MNC की बात करते हैं, the journey from MSME to MNC, it is important that of course जब इनकम होगी तो टैक्स भी होगा, और जब टैक्स होगा तो चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट भी होंगे. तो उसका टैक्सेशन कैसे होना है, कहाँ भी इश्यूज आएंगे, कौन कौन से बेनिफिट्स अवेलेबल हैं, और उनको कैसे आप एज ए कंसल्टेंट ऑफ द स्टार्टअप आप उनको कैसे एडवाइस कर सकते हैं सो दैट दे कैन गेट द मोर बेनिफिट. So these are the topics which Parul ma'am will cover today, and I request Pankaj also, so wherever required for the purpose of technical part, please chip in, and for the purpose of query, of course it is not needless to mention that PPT will be shared with you at the end of the session. So please do not message for the PPT. You will definitely get it.
Right.
The content is with Parul ma'am. Of course, the speaker is has the sole right with the content, and the content is very thick. So try to understand and digest today so that you can take the benefit properly and you can guide your client accordingly. Thank you so much. Welcome to Pankaj ji and Parul ma'am. Over to Sumit ji. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin ji.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin bhai. Now I straight away request Parul ji to take up the technical session, and query you can post in the chat box. Ma'am, query last में ले लें सारी.
हाँ, I think it's better because कभी-कभी होता क्या overlapping हो जाती है, so it's better
Right.
that we park it to the end.
Sure. So we will take up all the query in the last. You can post in the chat box. Otherwise, we will unmute everyone and after the session, so we can interact each one. Thank you. Now I request Parulji to take up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sachin ji. हालांकि आपने बार बहुत ऊपर रेज कर दिया. I don't know whether I'll be able to meet the expectations or not. राहुल द्रविड़ तो ज्यादा हो गया सर. But nevertheless, I'll try to give a very honest and very genuine effort from my end. So let's see how it turns out. Hopefully good. So with this, I thank Sumit ji, Sachin ji, Pankaj ji, all the organizers as well as the attendees. And let's just begin the session. So शुरू करते हैं. I'll be shortly sharing the screen and I'll just start. In between my camera could go on and off because of some network issues which I generally face, but I think we'll manage nevertheless. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes. So हालांकि इसके ऊपर टॉपिक का नाम होना चाहिए था स्टार्टअप टैक्सेशन, but I have covered in this presentation ESOPs. So primarily we'll be starting the discussion with ESOPs and then I'll be touching upon the important sections relating to startups as well. What are the exemptions and other benefits in totality which are given to startups? They are not forming a part of this presentation, but after we finish the presentation, I'll be sharing a document with all the participants जिसमें वो सारे sections और उनका analysis जो है I have already identified and analyzed in that document. It would be a Word document and not a presentation, for the purposes of the record. So we will start today's session with ESOPs because ESOPs are very, very integral part of startups. However, they are actually an integral part of all types of growing companies as well. But startups के लिए इसका एक different significance है, which I think many of us would be aware of. But nevertheless, I'll just take it up. Actually, startups में होता क्या है कि the employer or generally the promoters, they might not have initial liquidity, and that's why they might not be for hiring the talent pool, they might not have such great resource pool or deep pockets to pay for the good talent. So therefore ESOPs come in handy in such situations. So it is a very effective tool for any startup for hiring a good talent pool. So that is the first one of the key importance of ESOPs in case of startups. However, there are many growing companies and even very large companies also which offer ESOPs for the purposes of employee retention. So for example, in ITS sector, the employee attrition is very high. So therefore, what these companies do is by rolling out ESOPs, they ensure that employees have a long-term vision and they share that common long-term vision with the employers. Also, ESOP is an effective tool of incentivizing and motivating the employees to keep the employee morale up, because it is like a profit sharing mechanism as well. Or if not, then at least whatever gains the company makes, one can actually share those with the employees. So therefore, it actually motivates the employees. It instills ownership and belongingness in the employees because of course, if you have the shares of a company and the company is a growing one, then an employee is not restricted only to the take-home salary. There is something over and above, which is not a variable bonus, but which is a variable in terms of growth of that company, which is the concept of ESOP, which I'll shortly explain. There are certain terms relating to ESOP as well, जो कि मैं अभी आने वाले slides में I'll be explaining a little bit more in detail. Plus, it's a double benefit because employees also have an option. So as the name suggests, this is employee stock option plan, and there is no obligation on the shoulders of employee to buy the option. I mean, in terms of if the company is new, the company is unlisted, there might not be too many buyers of the shares, So if the employee is not sure, then they also have a choice not to exercise the option. So these are just options. They convert into shares later in time when the employee exercises such option. So I'll talk about that as well. Now there are different names, and actually there are different types of other compensation plans also, which are similar to ESOPs, which are sweat equity shares, employee stock purchase, stock appreciation rights, and RSUs. So there are certain differentiations between ESOPs and these, and it is important that the startups realize and they know the difference between all of these, because it it will be very helpful for them to devise the actual policy of the company in accordance with the law, because law sabhi mein to different nahi hai, but there are nuances which are different in different types of ESOPs. So before I move to these differences, I would say, of what a sweat equity is, what a stock appreciation right is, I would like to first discuss with you a little bit about ESOPs, and then we'll be talking about other equity-based compensation plans. Even the taxability aspect of it, I would like to discuss today over here. So what essentially is a ESOP? In case of an ESOP, what happens is that what the employer gives to the employee is not an actual share. In fact, they only give an option to the employee to purchase the share at a discounted value or at a predetermined or at a determined price, which is called the exercise price, later in time. Now, how much later? It depends on the considerations which are adopted by the employer. So generally what happens is that the employer may choose to have a cliff period or to have a vesting period. Now, what this cliff period or the vesting period is? Now, this cliff period is actually the time on the completion of a time period, so that whenever that time period gets completed or on the expiry of that time period, the employee shall be eligible, for the vesting of those options. Now, there are certain important terms here which we should note, which is, see, this is the chart I have created. Here I have not mentioned cliff period because then it will become too complex and difficult to comprehend. But as you can see here, what happens is that the company offers the ESOP to the employees in terms of granting of the options. So there is a date of granting. Then there is a date of vesting. Now, vesting is the time period when the employee becomes eligible to get those ESOPs. So from the date of grant up to the date of vesting, the person actually doesn't even have the rights on the, doesn't have any ESOPs in the place, but that is kind of a retention period or a time period during which the employee has to work for the company and perform so that they become eligible for the ESOPs. So similar is the cliff period, which means that the period when the vesting shall commence. So the company can actually have different criteria to define cliff period and vesting period. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, it could be more, to ensure to ensure that the employee sticks to the company. Then after the vesting happens, then the employee has to exercise the option. So that means the employee, from the date of vesting, the employee becomes eligible to exercise the option. Now, what is exercising the option? Exercising the option means that they apply to the company. I mean, whenever the vesting period ends, then the employee is eligible to exercise the option, and then such option can be exercised by writing a letter or writing a request to the company, and then vesting can be exercised, and the ESOP can be actually converted into a stock. So the actual stock comes in the hands of the employee on the date of exercise of option. So if the employee wants to exercise an option, they can make an application to the company. Also, whenever the employee resigns, the options which are yet to be vested, they shall lapse. So if you see in this diagram, if before the vesting of the option, which is the tab number 2, an employee resigns, then whatever options, balance options are there, which have not yet vested, they will all lapse. And for the shares which are already vested in the employee before the resignation, their treatment shall be there in accordance with the ESOP scheme of the company. So accordingly, how the employees should work is that they should read the terms of the ESOP scheme thoroughly, and they should calculate their vesting and exercise dates properly before considering even making a move from the company. They should evaluate the effects of the resignation on their option vested or exercised by them. Eventually, once the employee exercises the option and the shares are allotted to the employee, they may eventually sell the shares. And there is no fixed period. They may hold it as per their own considerations. They may hold it for a long term, for a longer period of time or a shorter period of time. Accordingly, capital gains shall be computed in their hands, which I'll be discussing a little later. Now, what are the key considerations for a startup for deciding the ideal time in case of ESOPs? So basically, the startup has to actually consider whether or not they have any expansions planned in the near future, or if there is any external or angel or VC funding that is coming up. That's also an important consideration while giving out these ESOPs, because accordingly the shareholding changes, and there are other company law compliances as well, which I'll not be covering in today's discussion, but there are certain company law, the company law compliances as well. Now, if any of this is happening, then it would be actually a right time for the company to roll out the ESOP scheme, because definitely once the VC funding comes in, or where there's a massive expansion in the company, then after that there's a lot of scope for the prices of the shares to rise, and accordingly for the employees also to make money on the ESOPs which are allotted to them. So as I said, that there are these ESOPs are governed by the company law. So what are the exact, so I'll just be talking about which is the law that governs an ESOP, because definitely it is not an unregulated fancy idea of a startup. This is very much within the four walls of the law, and it is very much being regulated and controlled by our MCA. So by issuing the shares, the company can increase its capital, of course. So both ESOP and the sweat equity shares, they are governed by the provisions of the Companies Act 2013 and the company's share capital and debenture rules 2014. So these are the regulations which govern the ESOPs, and it is not a domestic concept of a startup. This has been there, ever since even before the Companies Act 2013. It has been there for many decades now, the concept of ESOPs. It is just that because now the startups are doing the maths and they are finding it very suitable to their requirements, accordingly they are adopting ESOPs more and more. Also, in case of listed companies, the listed companies that are issuing the ESOPs, they also have to comply with the provisions of the Securities and Exchange Board of India and the other guidelines which are issued by SEBI for the issuance of these ESOPs. So that's an important point that one should keep in mind, that we have to check all these laws while designing the ESOP policy or a ESOP scheme of a particular company. Okay, so now what are the, if we say work-wise, what are the, so to say, compliances that a firm or a consulting firm can do, where we talk about the ESOP scheme procedure? What is the work that CAs can do? What is a professional opportunity for a CA or a startup consultant? So first of all, it is the drafting of the ESOP policy, because ESOP policy is a very I would say complex, it's a complex document which actually need a lot of legal knowledge and the knowledge of the sector in which you're doing, for which you're working. So the drafting of ESOP policy is quite complex. There are different considerations which one must keep in mind while designing the ESOP policy. Then the policy should be approved by the board. So the scheme of ESOP should be taken up at the board meeting and it should be approved. Then after the board meeting approval, there should also be a resolution that should be passed in the general meeting, which should also approve the terms of the scheme. Because let's understand this. These schemes are not for a year or 2 years. It's actually a long-term plan. It's a long-term retention plan for the employees and a long-term commitment from the company side also. So it's a huge commitment which both employee and not actually the employees, because they still have the option, but the company is making towards their employees. So therefore, the terms of the scheme should be approved both by the board of directors as well as in the general meeting. Then the grant of options, this happens. So this is a typical ESOP life cycle which happens, that once the scheme is approved, then the approved scheme is granted to the eligible employees, and the eligible employees, once they satisfy the vesting period, on the completion of the vesting period, they can actually exercise the options. Once they exercise the options, the shares are given to them. Of course, the exercise price, there's a valuation involved, which I'll be covering a little later in today's discussion. So that valuation happens for unlisted companies as well as for listed companies. There are different rules which are being defined under the Income Tax Act for both. And then there is a final allotment in the name of the employee. So this is a typical ESOP scheme, and you will see, as you can see, that there is a increasing need to engage a professional in this kind of a setup, because there are so many steps and so much of expert advice and expert assistance is needed for steering through most of the steps. Then I've also stated a few ROC compliances which may be required, which is you have to file the relevant MGT form relating to the ESOP scheme. There is a return of allotment also, which should be filed annually. Then there is a ESOP register which has to be maintained, because mind you, there are many employees and you need to actually maintain a register, because it could be that you may grant the option in one go, or you may stagger it over the number of years and then add it to it. If there are many employees, then it actually becomes a perpetual exercise. So therefore, sometimes considering the amount of compliance that needs to be done, sometimes companies even hire an internal person to take care of and to maintain the ESOP register. Also, if a company issues any ESOP scheme, then there should actually be a disclosure in the director's report as well. So this was actually an overview of the ESOP scheme. I would be, so I would be taking, and at least from the income tax point of view, I'll be taking up the session today and be explaining in detail what happens in each step and what are the tax issues which are relating to this ESOP. But before that, let's also understand what a sweat equity share is, and to try to find out the differences between the two, because many a times what happens is that the client comes back, or even in the initial discussion meetings, various clients come back with queries relating to the difference between the two, and actually the understanding of ESOPs for many people is very limited, and therefore it's important that as professionals we know the differences and we are able to explain this in a methodical manner to our clients as well. So if we talk about both the if we talk about the differences between an ESOP and a sweat equity, is that, as we know, that ESOPs are issued in the form of an incentive actually, and as a retention plan for the directors and employees of the company. Now one may say that director is director also eligible for the ESOPs? Now the answer is yes, because even a director, an executive director, is actually an employee of a company. And it's also a right which is given to an employee to exercise their option or to purchase the shares. Excuse me. I'm sorry. So On the other hand, in case of sweat equity shares are issued to employees or directors as consideration for the purposes of providing their intellectual property rights or any know-how or any value additions to the company. So a sweat equity, a typical example of a sweat equity would be that where the promoters invest in the money and there is another employee who says that the employee would provide or would introduce clients to the company. So whatever client list and the clients the person brings, apart from the salary, the person is given sweat equity shares because the employee is actually sweating it out, under the sun and generating the leads and generating the clients for the company. So in such cases, there is actually, rather than having an ESOP, it's actually a better idea to provide such employees as the sweat equity shares of the company. Another example could be where the employee is providing an important technology basis which the company will function or the company will be rolling out different products and services in the market. When such kind of an arrangement happens, in such case also, rather than giving a regular ESOP where the vesting period and the grant period, all of that is a very long fetched exercise, it is always better that we give a sweat equity to such an employee. If we talk about in terms of allotment, we would see that an ESOP is granted in the form of an option, as I told you earlier, that before the completion of the vesting period, it's actually only an option, not even a share. So a share is never given in the first place to the employee. Only an option is granted in case of an ESOP to purchase the share at a predetermined price on a future date. Now, these shares are allotted to the employees or directors only once they exercise their option of the ESOP grant. Okay. On the other hand, in case of a sweat equity share, the equity shares are directly allotted to the employees or the directors of the company, which are generally allotted at a discounted price or for a consideration other than cash. So this is a very, very important and a very basic difference between the two. And therefore, we should actually understand and decipher as to when we have to deploy which characters of the two and which of the two schemes we should actually apply in a particular situation. So for example, in case of an ESOP, if there is a director of a company, then as per the company law, a director includes a whole-time or a part-time director, but not an independent director. Because we see so many times it so happens that in case of a company, whosoever is the legal consultant of the company, they also become the independent director of the company, and they essentially are there only to handhold them in terms of legal advisory and rolling out of different schemes in the company. So therefore, such independent professionals who are independent directors in a company, they are generally not eligible for ESOPs when we see the definition of a permanent employee for a company. However, in the case of a sweat equity share, whether or not you have a whole-time director, a director is eligible for the purposes of a sweat equity share. So you can see the contrast between the two. Also, there are certain categories of employees who are ineligible under the ESOP scheme. For example, the employees which belong to the promoter group or is a promoter of the company. Mind you, it's the promoter, like the shareholder of the company, and not a director, because director we already covered. Or a director who either himself or through a body corporate or through his relative holds more than 10% of company's outstanding equity shares, whether directly or indirectly. So these are the carve-outs which are there in case of a sweat equity share, which are not there. In case of a ESOP, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. In case of ESOPs, However, there are no such carve-outs in case of a sweat equity share. Another key consideration when we differentiate between these two is that in case of a ESOP, the consideration has to be paid in cash. On the other hand, in case of a sweat equity share, the consideration is other than cash because you are directly issuing the shares at a discount, which may be partly cash and partly non-cash also. Okay. Now, coming to the lock-in period, as I said earlier, in case of a ESOP, the company decides the lock-in period. But under the sweat equity shares, generally the lock-in period is 3 years as per the company's share capital and debenture rules. So there's another distinction here which we may consider, because as I said, there are defined rules for both under the company law, and we have to abide by the rules which are being stipulated. When we talk about the pricing guidelines relating to the ESOPs, mind you, it is the company which decides the exercise price, and there are no pricing guidelines as such which are available under the company's share capital and debenture rules. However, in case of an ESOP, a registered valuer actually determines the pricing guidelines at the time of issuing the sweat equity shares. So these are very few of the differentiations which I have discussed today. There are many, many more, but as I said that I'll not be taking up too much of company law. I'll not be discussing too much of company law today. So therefore, I'm not taking that up in that much of length. But if you'll steer through, if you'll actually go through the legal provisions of both of these, then you'll recognize how much the contrast is there between the two plans. They're actually as different as chalk and cheese, and one has to actually see the entire law before suggesting either of the two. In fact, all these 4 programs which I've just listed here, the characterization as well as the treatment is very, very different. So we have to, as professionals, I think we have to really analyze them well before recommending it to a particular startup. For example, if we talk about the restrictions, in case of ESOPs, the company actually has no restrictions in terms of issuing or granting the ESOPs. On the other hand, when we talk about sweat equity shares, the company cannot actually issue sweat equity shares in excess of 15% of already existing paid up equity share capital in a particular year, or shares of the issue value of 5 crores, whichever is higher. So clearly there is a condition which one has to fulfill when we talk about the equity, the sweat equity shares. Further, the sweat equity shares in a company should not be issued more than 25% of the paid up equity capital of that company at any time. So it's a very, very important restriction, because when we talk about only 25% of paid up share capital, it means that no matter how important the employee is, or no matter how important the piece of intellectual property or the employee is offering, it is very, very crucial that the company should not exceed the limit of 25%, suggesting that it shouldn't be a skewed case where on account of issuing the intellectual property, the employee ends up taking the substantial part of the company, because of course that will not serve the purpose. So therefore there's a restriction of 25% of paid up share capital, and rightly so. I mean, such restriction should be there. So this is about the basic outline of an ESOP and a sweat equity share. And also this slide is self-explanatory for other equity-based compensation plans. If you'll dive in with the company law, you'll find more and more differences and more legal contrast between these 4 equity-based compensation plans. But without discussing that more in detail, let's just move and talk about the taxability of ESOPs in case of a typical startup. Yeah. So what happens is that in case of an ESOP, if the employee retains the shares once exercised, as we discussed earlier as well, that from the day of vesting, whenever the employee exercises the option, the shares are granted to the employee, and then the employee has the right to sell the shares eventually. Now there are 2-point taxation which happens in case of ESOP. Also, there is an amendment in the Finance Act of 2021, which also I'll be covering in today's discussion. First, we'll talk about the 2-point taxation in case of ESOPs. So now what happens is that if the employee who has exercised the option and who already has been allotted the share within a period of 12 months sells such shares, then short-term capital gain is attracted. Now, it also depends, the tax rate in the hands of the employee actually is based on whether or not the shares are that of a listed company or an unlisted company. So I'm first of all taking up the case of a listed company. So in case of a listed company, if the employee sells the shares acquired under the ESOP scheme and sells such shares within a period of 12 months, then short-term capital gain is attracted, and section 111A is attracted, under which 15% tax rate shall be applicable in this situation. Where the shares are held for more than 12 months, then long-term capital gain shall be applicable. And in case of a listed company, section 112A shall be applicable, which offers 10% tax rate, 10% capital tax rate without indexation if the gains exceed 1 lakh. Now, it's worthwhile to note that before Finance Act 2018, this long-term capital gain was actually exempt if the STT was paid. This was under section 1038, but still it doesn't, but since the Finance Act 2018, it has changed to section 112. So therefore, in case of a listed company, the long-term capital gain is 10% without indexation, where the gain exceeds 1 lakh. Now, let's take up the example of an unlisted company. In case of an unlisted company, if an employee holds the shares allotted for 12 months or less than 12 months, then short-term capital gain is attracted in the hands of the employee, and regular income tax shall apply as per on the basis of the regular tax slab which is there. However, if the employee holds such shares for more than 12 months and sells them eventually, then section 112 is applicable, and 20% of tax rate is applicable without indexation. Now, this treatment I'm telling you, once the employee has exercised the option, they have been allotted the shares, and after the allotment, within 2-3 years time or whatever time, they sell the shares. So depending upon their period of holding, we compute the long-term or short-term capital gains tax, and the tax rate is applicable on the basis of the status of the company. Now, the essential question which arises is, what is the period of holding in this case? Now, the period of holding clearly begins from the exercise date, which is the date from which the employee has actually applied for the options and has actually been allotted the options, up to the date of the sale. Now, let's go a little back in time and let's talk about the date of exercise. What happens on the date of exercise when the employee is actually asking for the allotment of the shares? So when the exercise happens and the employee is granted the shares, that time also there is a taxability, and that's why I said there's a 2-point taxability here in case of a ESOP. What happens is that on the day of exercise, the difference between the exercise price and the FMV, which is the market rate, whatever is the difference, that is taxed in the hands of the employees as a perquisite. Now, this is very, very important because I'll also discuss later, and basis this only, there is a Finance Act 2021 amendment has also come because of this. Because you see, what essentially happens is that let's take an example. In case of an unlisted company, what happens is that when the employee is granted the shares and when the employee exercises after the completion of vesting period, when they exercise their right and they allotted the shares, now they have the shares in hand, but typically those shares might not have too much of value in them because it's an unlisted company and business is not yet settled, and it would be actually quite taxing for the employee to actually for the company also to deduct TDS on this perquisite value. So it is actually difficult for the employee as well, because finding buyers for the shares of a startup can be actually tricky, can be actually very difficult, as they're generally not listed and there may not be an active market out there. Also, for meeting the TDS obligations, the employee has to either sell a part of the shares or they have to arrange the money from their own resources. So this was typically a challenge which many of the startups were facing, mostly the unlisted ones. And therefore, this amendment of 2021 Finance Act came up, according to which there were several representations before this, and this was actually a huge ask from the startup lobby to the finance ministry, and accordingly, because they were facing a lot of hardships, the startups and all, therefore accordingly they made several representations, and accordingly the changes were brought about in the Finance Act of 2021, which said that in simple terms, an eligible startup is either a company or a LLP incorporated after April 1st, 2016, but before April 1, 2022. So first of all, they defined a time period within which the company should be formed for giving a benefit. Of course, I'll be talking about the benefit which this Finance Act has given in terms of this perquisite valuation and the TDS on the perquisite. So there are three conditions which should be fulfilled. If these three conditions are fulfilled, then the eligible startup can actually deduct the TDS either after 5 years from the relevant assessment year in which the ESOP is offered, or from the date of sale of such shares, or from the date when the employee resigns. So what essentially is happening is that the Finance Act of 2021 has identified certain category of startups. Now, what is that category of startups? Those startups are typically the startups which are incorporated, which includes both company as well as LLP, which are incorporated between April 1, 2016 and April 1, 2022. That is condition number one. Secondly, they have a predetermined threshold that they are not exceeding 25 crores. This number actually keeps on changing, but for now it is 25 crores. And thirdly, they have a startup eligibility certificate from the Interministerial Board of Certification, which we all know it is it's very difficult to get it. So only those eligible startups shall be entitled to this benefit. Now we have identified the eligible startup. Now let's talk about the benefit which is there. Now the benefit is that such eligible startups shall not deduct the TDS immediately once the share is allotted to the employee. And what is the time period for which till which they can delay the deduction of TDS? That time period is until after the expiry of 48 months from the end of relevant assessment year, which is practically 5-year period. Secondly, from the date of sale of that share, which is very, very practical. Of course, when the employee eventually sells, then you have to give the TDS on the perquisite value, or from the date the employee resigns. Because of course, when the employee is resigning, whatever pending TDS is there on their salary part, that should be offered to tax. So now this benefit has been given to startups by this Finance Act of 2021 because the government understood that whatever TDS obligation is there, which has been imposed on the day when the shares are allotted to the employee actually hasn't got any value out of those shares. The employee will extract the value only once he sells the shares and the startup also doesn't have the means to actually compensate the employee. So actually it's quite a burden on the employee to deduct TDS at the time of allotment. Accordingly, this relaxation is given in the Finance Act of 2021, where first of all, they have defined the eligible startup. Second of all, they have given three instances on which the TDS shall be deducted. Mind you, all these three instances are later in time. So actually, they are not TDS on perquisite at the time of allotment of shares. It is TDS on perquisite at the time of either after 5 years of allotment, or on the date of sale of the shares, or on the date when the employee resigns, which is very much, I think, very much fair and very much logical at the same time. Now, still many people have a question, a natural question, which is that why only eligible startups are being covered, why not others at large? I believe the plausible reason for that would be because, as I said, ESOPs is not a concept which is very novel or which is just attached to the startups. I think ESOPs is there with most of the growing and grown companies as well. And therefore, if they would have generalized the provision, then it would have actually become a general law rather than, and everybody would take advantage of it. So therefore, they want to actually give the benefit to ESOP, where both the employer and employee many a times don't have the means to pay TDS at the time of the allotment. So therefore, this advantage the government wanted to give to only to the startups, eligible startups also. So therefore, they have introduced this this amendment. I have a few questions on this, but I'll be taking up, once I conclude. Okay, so before moving, let's also take up, a few unaddressed issues here in case of startups. Now, what happens is that in case of a startup, excuse me, taxing of ESOPs in the year of allotment might result in potential loss from the tax perspective if the value of shares drops significantly after paying the tax on FMV. So what happens is, once you allotted the share, so now I'm not right now talking about the startups, I'm talking about in general, the issue with the startups is that supposedly you're not getting this benefit. Supposedly you're not the eligible startup and you don't have the luxury of deferring your TDS on perquisite. So from the employee side, what happens is that the employee ends up getting the TDS deducted on the perquisite value. And in future, what happens is that the FMV drops. So as we discussed earlier, this TDS on perquisite value is computed by between the difference between the exercise price and the exercise price and the exercise price and the FMV. Okay. So once you have identified this as a perquisite and you have paid the TDS, after that, when there is there's actually a stark decline in the FMV, what happens is there happens to be a capital loss. Now, when there is a capital loss, which cannot be offset against the salary, because the law as on date is that whatever capital loss you have, you cannot set it off against the salary. So what happens is that if there is not enough capital gains for that employee, then whatever this payment of TDS is, or whatever this capital loss is, you can actually only carry it forward for 8 years, and then you have to actually eventually take the hit, you have to take the loss, and you have to write it off in your books. So there is no mechanism by which this loss can be set off. So this is one of the I would say an open area where I think there should be some there should be some changes which should be done by the government. Now, what happens when an ESOP is issued by a foreign company? So many a times it happens that employees of the Indian company are issued ESOPs of the parent company, which is headquartered abroad. Now, just because the parent company is headquartered abroad, it doesn't change the tax treatment on allotment. And what actually happens is that the shares are still taxed as a perquisite, and the employee of the Indian company is still supposed to, or the company is still supposed to deduct the TDS, and the Indian employee has to still bear the tax in India. Now, it also adds an additional compliance burden because these shares you have to declare it in the ITR also, because as we all know, in the Indian income tax return, there is a requirement for showing the foreign assets in your ITR, and you cannot plainly file an ITR one. You have to file your comprehensive return where you have to disclose your foreign assets, because for all practical purposes, these ESOPs shall be considered as a foreign asset. So these are certain considerations which one must keep in mind when you are disclosing the when you are considering the adoption of ESOP, both from the employer as well as from the employee's side. So I'll just take a 2 minutes break, I think, in between. I'll just have a sip of water and I'll just return. In the meanwhile, you may write your queries, please.
Sure, madam. I request all the participants to write your queries so that we can discuss after concluding this session. Muditji, we will share the presentation in which entire details, mail ID, contact number are there. So no need to worry. And
Okay, yeah. Now I'm back.
Ji, okay.
Yes. So, talking a little further, so there are many points in ESOPs, which I think due to paucity of time, I'll be taking up whatever whatever I have prepared for the session. But believe me, there are many more aspects to it, including the taxation aspect. For example, till now I have discussed what is the treatment in the hands of the employee. But let's also discuss the deductibility in the hands of the employer, because as we see, this ESOP is a scheme where two parties are involved. So when we see the deductibility of the ESOP, because all said and done, there is a cost in the hands of the company as well. So what happens is that whether or not the expenses in relation to the ESOP, rolling out of scheme, the legal expenses which are there, that's quite huge actually. So whether or not they are deductible under the Income Tax Act. Now, up till now, there is not a single specific section in relation to this. So all we do is that we take the refuge of the residual section of section 37(1), which says that deduction of expense that are neither personal nor capital expenditure and are not covered under section 30 to 36, because mind you, from 30 to 36 they are general expenses, but they're specified categories which are there, that shall be allowed. So which typically means that whatever is not covered under section 30 to 36, the specific provisions, they shall be covered in the residuary provision of section 37(1). So can we actually take the refuge of this section for the purposes of taxability under the ESOP? Now, as many of you must be aware that there are a couple of reasonably positive judgments where the tribunals have actually they have actually held in the favor of the employee. In fact, there's a recent Karnataka High Court judgment also, which is very recent and which is very favorable to the taxpayer, where this view has been upheld. One of the judgment is in case of CIT versus Lemon Tree Hotels of August 2015, where the Delhi High Court has upheld that the expenses related to ESOPs are an allowable expense under section 37. Also, there's a very recent judgment of Mrs. Biocon Limited versus DCIT Bangalore, where even the Karnataka High Court has vouched that and has ruled in the favor of the taxpayer, citing that ESOP expenses are actually an allowable expense. So these are very important, these judgments, and this understanding of claiming the ESOP expenses very crucial, because I tell you, it may sound easier, but there are many expenses which are relating to ESOPs which the company has to bear. It is not that much of a plain scheme to roll out and execute, because sometimes you have third party advisors on board who manage the ESOP trust, who have you have to do a proper administration, for which sometimes you have to keep a full-time employee as well. Then there is a trustee which is appointed, and a fixed salary is given to the trustee. There are valuation expenses, and there are other legal and administrative costs as well. So therefore it is very important that we take advantage of these favorable judgments, and accordingly the employers take suitable deductions in their books as well for the ESOP expenses. Now also there are certain questions which may arise. So like I talked about the capital gains. So there may be a question which may arise, that how do you determine the FMV? Because I talked about the fair market value. See, in case of listed company, it might be a little easier, but we should know what the law says, what the Income Tax Act says relating to the fair market value while computing the capital gains point, because I think I just skipped this fair market value thing, but I'll just take it up now. So in case of an unlisted company, whatever price is determined by the merchant banker, that is adopted as a fair market value. Okay, see, so here there's again a valuation expense that I just talked about. So this is an expense for the employer, because the employer has to hire a merchant banker and they have to pay for the valuation. On the other hand, in case of a listed company, if the stocks of that listed company are traded on the recognized stock exchange on the excise date, then the average of the opening and closing price is taken up for the purposes of valuation of the FMV. On the other hand, if the stock of the company, of the employer company, are not traded on any recognized stock exchange on the excise date, even though the company is listed, then whatever is the closing price on the date, on the preceding date of excise date, is taken up as the date of as the price of as the FMV. So these are important considerations, and one must keep them in mind while while getting into an ESOP in the ESOP scheme, both from the employer point of view as well as from the employee point of view. Now there's another very small but a soft point which I want to touch upon here to conclude the discussion on this ESOP, which is the advance tax. So what happens is that the employee, since this is this ESOP, whenever they will sell the share, if they're contemplating to sell the shares in a particular year, then they also have to think upon, or even at the time of allotment of the share to the employee, what happens is that it becomes perquisite in the hands of the employee. So therefore the TDS the company deducts, that is fine, but even then the employee should actually, while computing their advance tax, they should keep it in mind, and they should actually deposit adequate amount of advance tax in advance for whatever perquisites they may receive, or whatever capital gains they may end up on in the year of selling the shares allotted. And you understand, and we all very well know that this is very important. This advance tax point is very important, especially in case of individuals, because the due dates are like 15 June, 15 September, December and March. So there are 4 quarters, you are given adequate time, and the advantage is that there is no tax, there is no interest on whatever tax you deposit, and whatever refunds you get, you end up receiving some interest on it. So the penal interest you save under section 234B and C if you pay the advance tax. So this is also one thing which the employees should keep in mind by at both the points, at the point of allotment of the ESOP as well as in the year in which they are contemplating the sale of the share. So this is one aspect which should not be, which should be kept in mind by the employee and should not be overlooked by the employees. Now, quickly, I just want to take up a recent judicial precedent on the ESOP taxation, because any discussion is incomplete where we do not talk about the cross-border, transactions which we may witness. And even in case of ESOP, as I mentioned earlier, there could be cases where there is a cross-border transaction which is involved. So this is the case of Mumbai Tribunal, wherein it was held that perquisite value of a ESOP shall be taxable in India in the hands of an employee who was deputed in Mumbai. So there was an employee who was deputed in Mumbai, and the ESOP was, the perquisite value of ESOP at the time of allotment was actually taxed in the hands of the employee. Now the taxpayer contended that this should not be the case because the income does not accrue or arise in India and hence not taxable in India. Okay, so this was the single bone of contention by the employee. However, the Mumbai Tribunal held that since the ESOPs were granted in India while the employee was still stationed in India, and it also relates to the employment in India. Since all these factors are there, this is enough to establish the nexus, and accordingly, these ESOPs should be taxable in India. In fact, the taxpayer also tried to take the refuge under India-UAE tax treaty, but there also the tribunal held that Article 15 of India-UAE tax treaty actually envisages taxation of ESOP benefit in the country where the related employment is carried out. So thus, even under the tax treaty, the ESOP benefit would be taxable in India as if it relates to the services carried out in India. So here there was only a few months deputation. Therefore, the ESOP was actually taxed in India as a perquisite at the time of allotment. Yes, with this, I'll be concluding my discussion relating to ESOPs. And before moving on to the other aspects of taxability of a startup, I think I would like to take the queries if, whatever queries are there relating to ESOPs.
Parulji, can you see the chat box where 2-3 queries are there?
Yes, I can. Quite a number of queries there are. So there is a question from Richa. For TDS deductions on ESOP for startup, is it mentioned that it shall be deferred for 5 years? So does that mean that after 5 years, the company will deduct total TDS on whole, whose years or 5-year period is exempted? So Richa, the important point here is that we have to see that, so there's a particular event when this ESOP is getting deducted. So it is not happening every year. So the allotment happens only once, and this TDS is applied on the perquisite value, and that perquisite value is nothing but the difference between the excise price and the fair market value. So since this event happens once, there is a deferment only for the 5 years, but every year this event is not happening. So for a single event, after 5 years, TDS shall be deducted and paid, but it will be only paid once and on one value because the transaction remains single. There are no multiple transactions here. I hope, I hope this answer is clear. Yeah, Richa, are you there?
Actually, I'm asking that, ESOPs are vested in a number of years. So in 5 years, maybe 2 times or 3 times employee will get, exercise these ESOPs. So every time, will they be charged, as a perquisites? But in case of startup, as we discussed, that it will not be, taxed, TDS will not be deducted for the period of 5 years. So what will be the, taxation after 5 years, like for those, sorry, 2-3 times, whatever they have vested. So what will happen for them?
Yeah, understood. So Richa, I think I'll just take a contrasting example by which it will be more clear to you. Have you applied for these? There used to be a category, I think they're still there, where there used to be a tax-linked, tax-linked mutual fund which used to be there, right? Wherein every month you give a SIP and it is eligible to your tax exemption, but you're giving it every month. So whenever it matures, since if you give it for a threshold of 5 years, then whenever they mature, you get the tax benefit, right? So what happens is that for 1 month, if you give a SIP, that 5-year period for that month is calculated from that eligible date. Similar is this case in your question. What is typically happening is that, for example, a company is there which says in 5 years we'll be giving the the ESOPs, will be vesting the ESOPs to the employees. Okay, immediately on the date of vesting, the employee supposedly gets the allotment as well. So what is actually happening is that 25% of the value you are being allotted for all 5 years. Now for the first tranche of 25%, after the completion of 5 years, you have to deduct, for the company has to deduct the TDS and deposit for that transaction. And for that particular transaction, you actually compute the perquisite value on the basis of difference of exercise price and FMV for that 25% of shares allotted only. Now the next 25% of shares, since they get allotted in the second year, so therefore from the second year, you typically again calculate the 5 years, and accordingly on the expiry of the 5 years, which is the 6th year, the company has to deduct and deposit the TDS on the balance 25%, and accordingly the cycle will run. So whenever you become eligible, whenever the share is allotted, you compute 5 years period from there. Supposedly the employee doesn't resign and the employee doesn't sell, then accordingly you make the payment. And also to also to elaborate, this is the typical reason why I am saying that ESOP costs are there that the employee should consider, because many a time it becomes so complex that you have to actually have a full-time person who's actually taking charge and doing all these deductions and taking care of all the compliances. So I hope I'm able to answer your question.
Yes, ma'am. One more query I have regarding RSS. Have you heard RSA, Restricted Stock Awards?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you please elaborate something basically, I read that thing that, it has been, granted at very minimal price, and it has some different treatment than RSUs and ESOPs.
Yes. So if RSA, if we talk about from the company perspective, since it is a foreign concept, so therefore they are, if we talk about the Indian perspective, I think from the company's perspective, RSA, we are not, I'm not that much aware from the company's perspective, but yeah, from the employee perspective, yes, it is more beneficial because RSA units are allotted or transferred on the date of vesting, and they are also taxed as a perquisite upon vesting. So from an employee point of view, yes, we have given an opinion, but since it is a foreign company, therefore foreign company's perspective, the tax perspective, I have not analyzed as yet.
Okay, ma'am. Actually, that's what my inquiry is. Yeah,
it actually depends on the laws of that particular jurisdiction, actually.
Yeah. Actually, I have seen that 83 form needs to be filed also, because that will benefit the employees for non-deduction of TDS.
Correct. But you see, since the employee is the Indian resident or the Indian employee, okay, so therefore by virtue of residency, we shall apply the income tax laws accordingly. But when we talk about these RSUs or the sweat equity or ESOPs, they are actually regulated by MCA in India. So accordingly, whatever regulatory body, so there are more than two regulatory bodies in India. One is the SEBI, one is the MCA, then there is SEBI, then there is income tax. Okay, so accordingly, whatever the regulatory authorities are there overseas, accordingly that company perspective shall come out. So sitting here, it actually changes with the different jurisdictions as well. So sitting here, we cannot really analyze it unless we know which country it is, and then we read through the at least the basic laws of that country, because it's a regulated concept altogether.
It is US I'm talking about.
Yeah. So is that all, Richa? Can I move to the next query? Yeah. Can I move to the next query?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Parulji, can you complete the session? Richaji, I hope your query resolved. Now we can move.
No, actually not this one, but I got the point basically. My query was related to US, but no worries, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So moving on to the next query of Mr. Mayank Chopra. The query is, in respect of accounting of ESOP expense for the listed company, since ESOP will be exercised in future period, let's say 3 years from the grant date, then how will listed company book expenses yearly, as the FMV will change every year? If the answer is differential amount between exercise price and FMV, so then how to account for at the zero period considering the time value of money? Will we be considering inflation, growth, and other macro factors, etc.? Okay. Yeah. So, Mayankji, if you could, what I understand of your query is that you're asking that since an ESOP is exercised in the future period, which is 3 years from the grant date, then what happens to the booking of expenses in case of a listed company? Okay. So which kind of expenses are we talking about here?
Yeah, actually, ma'am, the query is in relation to the ESOP when because the share value will be different every year, so that will be a cost for the company. So let's say after 3 years time, if a particular ESOP value, let's say the exercise price is 10 rupees, and after 3 or 4 years time, when they exercise it, the price becomes 40. So then the employee will only pay 10, right? And then the difference amount of 30 will have to be borne by the company. Am I correct on that?
No, sorry, can you please come back? I'm sorry, I couldn't gauge. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying that like if the exercise price is 10 rupees and which is exercised by the employee after 3 years, 4
Hmm.
rupees 10. But considering the fact that it's a listed company and if it grows in future and if price becomes 40, so
Hmm.
what will happen to that differential price? So because this will go from the company's pocket, right?
Okay, so just to just to elaborate on this point, the thing is, you have mentioned three prices actually. Okay, one is the grant price or the exercise price which is there.
Mhm.
Then second is the sale price when the employee actually sells. So there are actually 3 points of taxation here. If we understand this, then we understand the entire setup. Now the first point is where the difference between exercise price. So the exercise date is the date of allotment. So on the date of allotment, whenever the allotment happens, irrespective of the date of grant, whenever the allotment happens, the first point of taxation happens on that day. Okay, which is the date of exercise. Now on the date of exercise, whatever the difference is between a FMV and the exercise price, that is computed as that is freezed as a perquisite in the hand of employee, and then TDS is deducted and deposited. Now this concept is as simple as this. Now
Mhm.
in case of an eligible startup, it may so happen that after 5 years you will do it, but the valuation is freezed, because as I told you, in case of a listed company, there is a defined law in accordance with which we compute the FMV. Once the FMV is freezed, we already know the excise price, the transaction is freezed. Now you have to either, in case of eligible employee, in case of eligible startup, you have to pay it after 5 years or on the sale by the employee or on the date of leaving by the employee. Or in case of a non-eligible company, you will pay it right on the right in the year in which the date of exercise is there. Okay, this much is clear.
Yeah, actually, this is from taxation point of view,
Yeah.
but my query is from the point of view of accounting. So whatever there will be the difference, how the particular
I'll Yeah, I'll just stop you there. So
Yeah.
you were talking about the expenses. So I believe you're talking about the employer's expenses, right?
Right.
So when you talk about the employer's expenses are not the perquisite. The perquisite, whatever tax cost is there, that is in the hands of the employee. Now employer's expenses are valuation expenses, okay, professional expenses, legal expenses. So these are the expenses of the employer. So that the employer has to book, as I said earlier, under section 37(1). And it has nothing to do with the FMV, because this treatment that I told you, the perquisite, this 2-point taxation, this is in the hands of employee in both the instances. One on the date of allotment, secondly on the date of sale. I hope this is clear.
Yeah, ma'am. But like on the date of exercise, on the exercise date, let's say they take that particular share, but at that point of time the price is 40. So how they will get that listed share? So definitely they have to, the employer will buy at 40 and give it at 10.
So it's not like that. Hold on, Shreya. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that FMV is not a concept which the company or the employer has to ponder over. FMV is for the purposes of employee, the taxability in the hands of employee. The employer doesn't have to see,
Okay.
yeah, so the employer is not actually buying the share and then, and then giving it to the employee.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the employer, already the price at which they have granted, they have booked that expense in their books at the grant price.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so whatever, so even if it is 10 rupee grant price, okay, or 10 rupee excise price, the booking happens at that price and not at FMV. So any amount of difference, see, understand, any amount of difference, the employer cannot say that this is the this is the profit foregone by me, and therefore this profit foregone by me, I will book it as an expense. The expense to the employer is only either the excise price or the grant price.
Okay, got it.
Between the two is actually a profit now.
Yeah, the difference between them is actually a profit. So
On which already the employee is paying the taxes as a perquisite. Then why should the employer also take it as an expense? Because it's actually profit, not an expense.
okay.
Yeah. So I hope I hope that I'm able to address the queries. Is there any other query as well? I can't see any in the chat box.
Parulji, I don't think there is no other query. So can you complete your session?
Okay, sure. So now, so now I'll be discussing. So this was all about ESOP. This presentation is there, which I've prepared. You can also, there are certain other pending points which are self-explanatory, the legal checkpoints and other points. The recent trends in the ESOPs as well, which one may, since they are self-explanatory, one can actually read through them and understand. If at all there is a query or anything you want to ask, on the last page of the presentation, my contacts are being given. One can touch base with me, and accordingly we can have an offline discussion as well. Now moving on, I'll be talking about the eligible deductions and expense and exemptions in case of a startup. Now this is also very, very important, because any discussion relating to startup is incomplete without talking about the tax benefits which a startup is entitled to. Okay, so I'll be taking up this also in today's discussion. And once this discussion is over, then I'll be sharing a detailed document on these exemptions and benefits with all the participants for the purpose of your ready reference. I think few of them, I'll just give a at first I'll be giving an overview of these, and then I'll be discussing in detail each one of them. So what essentially, is the difference in a startup and a regular company? See, a startup, generally what government wants to do is they want to promote the startup, and they want to give them, the startup, certain benefits. But what is the intrinsic feature of a startup? Is the startup any different from other regular companies? It's very, very important for us to understand this, because once we understand this, then we understand why the company, why the government wants to promote, and why the government wants to give the benefits to these startups. First of all, any company which is more than 10 years older, they do not consider it as a startup, which is very well recognized concept. Any company which is older than 10 years, you can't practically call it a startup. Okay. Secondly, there is an annual turnover threshold also, which is for 100 crores. But one distinctive feature which defines a startup is that a startup should be relating to innovation, development, or improvement of a product or a process or a service. It should be a scalable business. So what do we understand by a scalable business? A business where you get a lot of turnover, but the promoters, or there is a handful of people who are generating that turnover, or a business where the turnover is large, but at the same time, there is a huge potential for employment generation and creation of wealth. So, my dear colleagues, it is the second case where there is a good potential of employment generation, where there is a good potential of contributing to the economy, where there is a good potential of improvising a product or a process or a service. There, that is the actual definition of a startup. And this definition has been kept this way because there are many a company, large corporations, which can actually hive off, certain businesses of theirs, and they can claim the benefit under a startup. Therefore, the government has also said that any company which is formed by splitting up or reconstruction shall not be an eligible startup. So this is the entire definition of startups under the Income Tax Act. And this is very, very crucial to understand it, because on this basis only we define whether or not all these benefits that I am going to talk about today, whether or not a company shall be eligible or not. Now, there is another, additional thing, because as you see, section 80, IA, IB, IC, all these sections have this splitting up and reconstruction clause, and they have other threshold which are there. But in case of a startup, the government has also additionally added a certificate of eligibility from the interministerial board. So now they have actually formed a body called the interministerial board, from which if you get an eligibility certificate, only then you are an eligible startup under the Income Tax Act, otherwise not. So, and mind you, this is a very difficult certificate to get, because you have to actually prove that all the thresholds that I talked about. You have to actually create a business case and accordingly move ahead and get this. So this is the last criteria, but which one needs to fulfill to become an eligible startup. Okay. Now the entity, any startup could be a private limited company or a LLP. Okay. Again, the same thing which we just read in the, the definition is actually the same, quite similar, which is the entity should be formed between April 2016 and April 2021. This is also, one of the essential important features of a startup. So the list is quite long. I'll just be taking up quite a few, I think, important points I've already discussed for the paucity of time. So once we understand what a startup is and what eligible startup is, and once we understand what we require for the eligible startup, then we move ahead with the discussion, okay, of all the benefits which are there applicable on a eligible startup. Now, the very first amongst the benefit is, as I said earlier, the section 80 IAC, which is section 80, which is there, which says that once you apply in Form 1 for securing the income tax certificate and you get registered with the interministerial board, then you become eligible startup under section 80 IAC. And there's a long list of documents which you have to submit, which is there in my detailed note, which is quite academic. I'll circulate it and you can have an access to it. So what is the benefit that you get if you are an eligible startup and you get this? So the benefit is that in 7 out of 10 years, you get a 100% business profit exemption. Sorry, in 3 out of 7 years, you get a 100% business profit exemption. So which is a huge support for any startup. See, initially what happens is that most of the startups are mostly making losses. So therefore the time period is 7 years. That initially if for 2-3 years you're making losses, you can actually make a loss. And then for the next 2-3 years, for next 3 years, you can take a 100% exemption from profit. So that therefore for 3 consecutive assessment years out of a 7-year time period is given to an eligible startup. So that is section 80 IAC, but you can only do it if you have the interministerial board approval. And for the interministerial board approval, as I said at the very beginning, there are some very, very stringent thresholds which one has to cross. Now a second and much talked about and hyped about benefit which was given exclusively to startups was the angel tax. Now, what is the angel tax and why the term angel? You know, why we are glorifying this? Because the provision is very old, very, very old provision in Income Tax Act. And this provision is section 56 to 7B. Now, this is a deeming provision, as we know, and this is an anti-tax avoidance provision as well at the same time. Now, what was happening was that whatever the investors were investing in startups, the startups, they knew they've got a great business plan, they've got a great potential, scalability, everything is there. So whenever they would issue shares to a new shareholder, to a new investor, they would offer a 10 rupee share for a 100 rupee valuation or a 100 rupee share for a 1000 rupee valuation, citing that there is a huge potential of the company and the investor should actually pay premium. So this was quite rampant. This is today also, as on date, the investors pay the premium to get a share in a startup. Now, as per the income tax provisions, as we know, 56 to 7B, this section is a very old one. What happens is that in case of an Indian company, whatever share premium is received over and above the fair market value of share of a startup, that is, you have to, tax it in the hands of the receiver. So therefore, this was getting taxed rampantly. Therefore, this angel tax was introduced and there was a bit of relaxation which was provided to the startups. So what essentially the relaxation is that the CBDT amended this Rule 11 UA 2B of the Income Tax Act, and accordingly they said that you just require a valuation from the merchant banker, which is compulsory. Earlier it was chartered accountant, now it is merchant banker. For determining the FMV of the unquoted equity shares, and the startup need to accordingly prepare, procure the report of the merchant banker, which shall specify the fair market value as per the income tax rules. Once it happens, so all of this was done through this notification dated February of 2019, whereby the CBDT said that in order to seek this exemption of angel tax under section 56 to 7B, the startup has to declare the angel investment to the DPIIT. There is a prescribed form for it also, form 2. And accordingly, whatever exemption is there under section 56 to 7B, that shall be available to the eligible startup if they are a recognized startup by DPIIT and the aggregate amount of paid up share capital and the share premium after the issue or the proposed issue of share is less than 25 crores. So this is, so what they're actually done is whatever angel tax was there, why the fancy name of angel tax? Because whatever premium was paid by the investor, which was mostly called the angel investor, there would be a tax on it, on the premium amount. And therefore the name automatically becomes angel tax. So there was a relaxation which was given to the eligible startups from this, from the clause of this angel tax, and therefore, and it was given in the early 2019, and which stands today also. So this is a very, very important benefit which was given to the startups. Then very recently, there is another change which came, which is in section 54GB, which is the tax exemptions on the capital gains. Now, what is essentially happening is that if an individual sells a residential property, and if the consideration, the net consideration, which is a capital gain, is subsequently invested in subscription of the equity shares of an eligible startup. So for instance, somebody made some capital gains and then you invest it in an eligible startup, then the long-term capital gain on such transfer of residential property shall be exempt under the provisions of section 54GB. Okay, so this is also a very, very important benefit which is given to the startups, which will ensure that a lot of investments comes flowing in for a startup, because there is an automatic benefit to the investor who's investing, who's made a capital gain. But if they reinvest in a startup, then they'll be getting a capital gain exemption. So this is also very, very important benefit which is being given to a startup. Now again, there are certain thresholds which are being defined. The common amongst them is the interministerial board approval. So these things should actually be kept in mind while checking all of these provisions. If your startup or your client startup doesn't have this interministerial board approval, then you have to ensure that you get that approval first, and only then you start suggesting all these benefits which the income tax department has provided. Now talking about section 54GB, actually what happens is that there is an end user restriction also in these investments, because as we know, all these section 54s which are there, which exempt the capital gains earned by an individual and an HUF, you know, there's an end user, there's a lock-in period, or there's an end user restriction which is there. And I'll just read it out, the restriction which is there. Now here, the term new asset means new plant and machinery, and it doesn't include any machinery or plant which before the installation by the assessee was used either within or outside India. Any office appliance including computer or computer software, the holding period of which is 3 years. Any vehicle, so you cannot actually buy a car and gift it to a startup, that's also not allowed. So the company should essentially, and there's a long list, I'll not read through the entire list. The crux of the matter is that the company has to utilize the amount for the purchase of a new asset, and the amount should be utilized within a period of 1 year from the date of subscription. Okay, so for claiming the exemption under 54GB, the claimant is required to invest the amount in the new asset within the period of 1 year from the date of transfer. Okay, and if the amount is not invested within the due date of filing of income tax return, then the claimant is required to deposit the amount in the capital gain deposit account scheme. So this is typically how these all 54 exemption schemes are designed in case of a capital gain. Also, the amount so deposited to the account need to be utilized for subscription in the equity shares within the prescribed time. However, if the amount is not utilized within the given period, the unutilized amount would be taxable in the previous year in which the such time period expires. So here, as you can see, and as you will flip through the entire scheme of assets which one can or cannot invest in, you will find that it is not a very simple planning that you sell the share, that you sell the immovable property, and then you just buy a car and then you show it under the name of the startup. It is not as simple. You have to actually buy a business asset, which is a robust and important business asset, and accordingly you must buy it within 1 year. So there are very, very important restrictions which are there when we talk about this benefit. And also, last but not the least, there is another additional condition which says that the equity shares of this company, of this startup, and any new asset which is acquired by this startup cannot be transferred for the period of 5 years from the date of acquisition. So there is an additional lock-in of 5 years for this asset. So it is not that you claim the income tax, the capital gain exemption, and then you end up selling it. But if you do so, and before the expiry of 5 years, if you happen to sell this asset, if the startup happens to sell the asset, the exemption allowed under 54GB in the hands of the investor, that shall be withdrawn. So as you can see, very, very stringent thresholds to protect the interest of the revenue, and at the same time, very, very good, I think decently good exemptions which are given to the startups and those investing in a startup also. For the investor also, it's a good relief which will actually encourage the investor to invest in a startup. Now, also for those professionals here who do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, we are aware of Section 79, the provision of Section 79. It is used a lot by us because this is one of the first considerations when we are doing a merger of two companies, which is or wherever there is a transaction where there is a change of shareholding in the hands of a company. So what happens is that whenever the shares of a company changes hand in a particular financial year, the first impact it has is that the carry forward of losses becomes impermissible. Okay, so this is what the essence of Section 79 is. So once there is a particular threshold beyond which 51%, which is if you sell the shares of a company, then you are not eligible to take the benefit of the carry forward of the losses. So this is one thing which is the very basic of any merger or in our country, and which we are very aware of the provision. So what happens is whenever there is a carry forward, in case of an eligible startup, the same carry forward of loss is permissible. Okay, so the government has given such a huge relaxation because we know that each time an investor comes in, there is a change of hands of shareholding, and accordingly, and most of the startups are also having huge losses in the initial years as well. So therefore, if they'll not give a set of carry forward and set off of losses, then it would be an area of concern for a startup. So therefore, considering this, there is a relaxation in Section 79 which has been given to an eligible startup, where the carry forward of loss is permissible in an eligible startup, which is only the startup, by the way, which has an approval from an interministerial board, that even if there is a change of 51% of shareholding and certain conditions are fulfilled, they can might as well carry forward the losses and set off those losses in future years. Now, what the conditions are: if all the equity shareholders carrying voting power on the last day of the previous year in which the loss was incurred continue to hold the shares on the last day of the previous year. That's the first condition. The second condition is that such loss has been incurred during the period of 7 years since the year in which the company was incorporated. So the loss shouldn't be older than 7 years. If the loss is older than 7 years, then the provision of original Section 79 shall apply. So with this, I think I will conclude today's session. Mind you, whatever I have discussed, there are many, many nuances to it, even from the income tax perspective, but which are quite academic in nature. Therefore, I have not discussed here because then it would become plain reading of the entire scheme of things. But yes, I would recommend you guys, you all please read through those because they're important. But whatever the gist was, I think I've tried to collate it in today's discussion and to present it before you, hopefully in a manner which is lucid and which you were able to comprehend. I think whatever time is left, I would actually like to take up more queries if there are any.
Parul, as there is no other query, so can we conclude with your permission? And I hope you have addressed all the concern very well. So, Parulji, thank you very much for your wonderful deliberations, and all the participant. Although participant yesterday there was more than 50 participant, but due to our this recording we have provided, so very few participants left too early. So thank you very much, Parulji, once again, and thank you to all participants for wonderful joining. And tomorrow we will meet again on the this topic, and we will have our speaker CA Pankaj Chawla ji. So thank you, Madam Parulji. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.
And definitely we will share the presentation as Parul ma'am has already been shared to me. So I will share to each one of you. Thank you very much. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.